This Saturday, the best rivalry in sports makes its return for the 125th edition of the Army-Navy game. Unfortunately, this year's game will take place at Northwest Stadium in Landover, Maryland, which is a complete dump. Sorry Commanders fans, but you know it's true. Army enters this year's matchup having won the last 2 matchups in the series and 6 of the last 8. The last 2 meetings have come down to Army making a goal line stand to win the game, forcing a goal line fumble in overtime back in 2022, and then stonewalling the midshipmen's crazy comeback attempt at the goal line last year. The winner of this year's contest will take possession of the Commander-in-Chief's trophy, as both teams were able to defeat Air Force earlier in the season. Before we turn our attention to the teams, let's talk a little bit about the uniform battle. Army will be honoring the 101st Airborne Division and their incredible stand against the Nazis in the town of Bastogne during the famous Battle of the Bulge. I highly recommend everybody take a little bit of time out of their day to learn about their heroic efforts. Meanwhile, Navy will also be honoring a World War II fighting force in the Jolly Rogers. The Jolly Rogers have a very rich history in the skies dating back to 1943, as they played a key role in winning the battle in the Pacific Theater. Again, I highly recommend everybody take a little bit of time out of their day to learn a little about the backstory of the Jolly Rogers and their incredible history. This year, I have to give the edge to Army in the uniform battle. Both are absolutely great, but Army really knocked it out of the park with these absolute beauties. So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at the teams and break this game down. We'll start with the defenders of the Commander-in-Chief's trophy and the American Athletic Conference champions, the Army Black Knights. Head coach Jeff Monken continues to do an incredible job with the boys from West Point, as he has led them to an 11-1 season, where they finished ranked in the top 25 of the college football playoff rankings. As we take a look at the starters and key contributors, we start with the heartbeat of the offense, the big boys on the offensive line. This group has been nominated as finalists for the Joe Moore Award, which goes to the top offensive line in all of college football. Army loves to run the ball in between the tackles and into the teeth of the defense, and this group has been outstanding at getting the push, creating holes, and allowing their runners to reach the second and third levels of the defense. I cannot sing their praises enough. They are a fantastic unit and will need a big game on Saturday afternoon for Army to walk out with the win. Running behind that great offensive line up the middle will be quarterback Bryson Daly and fullback / running back Kanye Udo. We'll start with Daly, as he's one of my favorite players in all of college football. He can run by you, he can run through you, and oh yeah, he can leap right over the top of you as well. He leads the FBS in rushing touchdowns with 29, while also rushing for over 1,400 yards this season. He has been an absolute joy to watch over his Army career, and will leave West Point as one of the best Army quarterbacks of all time. They will also use fullback Kanye Udo a ton in between the tackles as well. He is the best pure runner on this Army team, and the scariest part is he's just a sophomore. In this game last season, he led Army in rushing with 88 total yards as a true freshman. The Navy defense is going to have their best game of the season if they want to contain these two. Another key threat on the ground is running back / wide receiver Noah Short. The Black Knights love to get him the ball out on the edges in space where his speed can really take over. He is their home run hitter. If he gets the ball with green grass in front of him, watch out. He's also a very good deep threat as a wide receiver, but we'll get back to that in a minute. These are the depth pieces for Army in the backfield. Expect to see quite a bit of Jake Rendina. He comes in as a lead blocker for Bryson Daly and will play a key role in some short yardage situations. Tyrell Robinson could also be a factor, Army doesn't use him a ton, but when he gets the ball in his hands, he can definitely make big things happen. He also returns kicks for the Black Knights as well. Moving on to the pass catchers, the two main threats are Noah Short, who we just talked about moments ago, as well as Casey Reynolds. Army loves to go deep in what I call the money zone, which is in between the 50 and the opponent's 35-yard line. Army loves to go for the big shot play in that 15-yard area, and it's almost always either Reynolds or Short as the target. And of course, it comes off play action. In last year's matchup, Army took 2 shots in that range. They didn't hit on it, but came close and will definitely be trying again this year. Tight end / running back Hayden Reed could also be a sneaky option here as well. Flipping over to the defensive side of the ball, we start with the defensive line, which has been solid all season for the Black Knights. However, they are banged up and dealing with all kinds of injuries, and because of that, Army are not very deep on the defensive line. So they will need these guys to play a ton and be very effective to stop Teska in the Navy rushing attack. Moving on to the second level, and this is where Army really succeeds. Obviously, this group is led by Caleb Fortner, who made this unbelievable play last year that ended up being the game-winning touchdown. He will be the most important player on the Army defense. Expect him to have his nose in all of Navy's business. Beside him is Anjan Thomas, who leads the team in tackles and will be just as important in tracking down the Navy rushers. Elo Madozi will also be very important, as he will be setting the edge for this Army defense. Navy loves to get outside on the edges, so it will be very important for the Army outside linebackers to contain them as much as possible. On the back end, Army is led by their safeties Max DiDomenico and Casey Larkin, who will definitely have to be on their toes because Navy is more of a threat to burn them deep this year. DiDomenico had a pick in this game last year and will be back looking to make the Navy offense pay for any big mistakes. They also have Donovan Platt on the outside, and he has been a fantastic cover corner all season long. Navy will likely look to test this group earlier than they did last season, so Army will need this group to be better than they were in that game a year ago, where they allowed Navy way too many easy completions down the stretch of that game. Special teams will likely play a big role in this one as well, and that bodes well for Army, who I would say has the advantage in that area. Whether it's through fakes or blocks, this Army special teams unit has shown that they can make those big game-changing plays in those big moments. With this being their biggest game of the year, I wouldn't be surprised if they have a special trick or two saved just for this very game. And if it comes down to the kicker for Army, they will rely on Trey Granati, who is 8 of 9 on the year and has a long of 39 yards. On the other side, the midshipmen will be entering this matchup, much like last year's, with a massive question mark at quarterback, as starting quarterback Blake Horvath is questionable with an injury after missing their last 2 games. So if he is unable to go, it'll be up to sophomore Braxton Woodson. He may not be as good a passer as Horvath, however both can burn you with their legs, but I would say Woodson is definitely the better pure runner of the two. But the good news for Navy is that both are actually really good options for them, so they shouldn't be too worried about potentially missing their starter. Now let's talk about the midshipmen's offensive line, because much like Army on the other side, these guys have been great all season long and deserve a ton of credit for Navy's offensive success. Navy are very creative offensively, and again, these guys are a big part of it. You'll see lots of pulling and trying to get their blockers out in space. They're kind of the opposite of what Army loves to do. Army loves to run up in between the tackles. Navy are quite the opposite. They will still run up the middle, but they do their best work on the outside, on the edges, using their speed and quickness. Navy has a ton of talent in their backfield, starting with fullback Alex Teska. He will be Navy's main rushing threat in between the tackles, but they'll also attack the edges with him as well. He is a big play threat at the fullback position. He only had 9 carries in this game a year ago. Expect that to go up in this year's matchup. They also have Daba Fofana, who is more of their short yardage and blocking fullback and should play a key role in this one as well. They also have 2 outstanding running backs in Eli Heidenreich and Brandon Chapman. Both of these guys excel as both runners and pass catchers. Heidenreich in particular is a big play threat at all times. He leads the team in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving TDs while averaging over 7 yards per carry. I would go as far as to say that he is probably the best overall player on this Navy offense, and they need to get him the ball as much as possible. Chapman is also a very good back and can make big plays when the ball is in his hands. But make no mistake about it, these guys need to get the ball more than they did in last year's matchup if Navy wants to come out with the W. These two combined for just 7 total touches in last year's matchup. That will not work. They need to double that on Saturday. The midshipmen also have some interesting pass catching options in Nathan Kent, Cody Howard, and Jake Norris. Kent is a speedster that can take the top off a defense. He is a sprinter on the Navy track team, and trust me, his speed translates just as well to the football field. I expect Navy to take at least 2 deep shots to him in this game, and they'll even try to get him involved with some jet sweeps and whatnot. Howard and Norris, meanwhile, are both very solid tight ends that are great blockers in the run game and sneaky good pass catchers as well. If the Army defense isn't on their toes, these guys could definitely hurt them in the passing game. Moving over to the defensive side of the ball, we start on the defensive line with 3 really solid defensive linemen in Luke Pires, Landon Robinson, and Justin Reed. These guys are ferocious at the point of attack, and all 3 have had very good seasons. But Justin Reed is the most disruptive of the bunch as he leads the team and tackles for loss and sacks. Landon Robinson, though, should not be slept on in the interior. He was voted first team all-conference this season and is an integral part of this Navy defense. But this unit is going to have their hands full going up against one of the highest performing offensive lines in all of college football. It goes without saying, but these guys are going to need to have their best performance of the season for Navy to pull the upset and get the win. Moving on to the linebackers, which might be the most underrated part of this Navy defense, and they are led by Colin Ramos and Kyle Jacob. Ramos has led the team in tackles throughout the season and has arguably been the best player all season long for the midshipmen, and he was an absolute monster in this game last year, finishing with 16 total tackles, which led all players on both teams. Expect to see number 44 all over the field, being a nuisance to the Army offense. On the back end, Navy has an absolute ton of talent, but Rayon Lane III and Deshaun Peel are the stars of that unit. Lane is a terrific player that started to gather NFL interest. Here he is with a tremendous interception that he takes all the way back for a touchdown. Deshaun Peel is the top corner for this Navy defense and has been great for them all season long on the outside. He even had a game earlier this year against Charlotte where he returned 2 interceptions for touchdowns. He also had a big pick 6 against Air Force as well, so if either of these guys get the ball in their hands, watch out because they can definitely make big things happen. And finally, if this one comes down to the kicker for Navy, they will rely on Nathan Kirkwood, who is 4 of 7 on the year with a long of 46 yards. So with all that out of the way, my prediction for this, the 125th Army-Navy game, is that Army will sink second after a 23-20 victory. I think Army is the better team in the trenches, particularly with their offensive line, and that's going to be a big factor as it always is. I also think Army is built to take advantage of some of Navy's key weaknesses. Most notably, I think the Army defense matches up really well with their linebackers and safeties against the Navy backs and receivers. Navy can definitely pull this upset though if they are able to use their speed and elusiveness on offense and can force Army into having to throw the ball against a very good Navy secondary. So with that, thanks for watching, enjoy the game, and let's hope everyone is able to walk out injury free.